It was during that 371 days where my father worked 18 hours a day continuously that Clayton became quite ill. And so they had to take him to Kingman, which was some distance away. And he was in mortal danger. Don't know exactly why. But Dad, when he finished doing his work on the dairy, for 5 days he would then drive to Kingman, stay with Clayton, and then drive back and do the dairy. He did that 5 days in a row, he says, without sleeping. And he said, he felt later something kind of happened to his mind then, but it was not discernible to me. Dad had a terrific mind and a great memory. But that experience completely wore him out, so we moved to a little town called Valentine. And he started working on the Union Pacific Railroad on the signal gang. He would be gone for a week at a time, living in a boxcar or caboose or whatever it was. And during that time, we were left alone with Faye. Faye was a cruel woman in many ways. She was certainly verbally and physically abusive. I remember once Bill and I were supposed to be cutting wood for the stove, and because everything was wood burning stove at that time. I remember her waking us up after we had gone to bed. I think it was early in the morning before the sun was up, and she cursed at us and told us to get out and get some wood. And I remember Bill and me out, we would use a big saw to cut off portions of railroad ties, which is what we use for firewood. And I can remember out there in the cold, cutting wood. I couldn't have been, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6. I don't know how old I was at the time. Faye would hit you. I remember her sending me out to get a stick so she could whip me, and said, go find a bigger one. I guess I was trying to find the smallest one I could. And Dad did not know that she was being abusive to us. I will tell later about an experience with Faye when I became an adult, but this was a very hard time. Dad was gone, and I'm sure it must have been very hard for her to have 5 children and to be very poor. I remember taking a bath in a great big tin tub. We didn't change the water. We just, everybody got in and took a bath on Saturday night, whether we needed it or not. My father had an unusual sense about pets. During different times of my life, we had a coyote for a pet. This is when we were living in Valentine. Later on, we had a Gila monster and a badger. I don't know what my father was trying to. Kids go out and play with the Gila monster for a little while. Anyway, I remember listening to the radio on Saturday mornings, listening to the serials. I remember Bill and me going to school at an Indian school. Kids from the bottom of the Grand Canyon apparently came up and went to school during the school year. And I remember going to school with these Indian kids and having this big Indian girl chase us into the boys' bathroom, which was an outside toilet, by the way. I don't have very many memories, certainly not very many pleasant memories of this time. But it was while we were living at Hackberry that Faye ran away with a soldier. And Dad went and he found her and took the sheriff with him. And the sheriff told her, you either go back and take care of your kids or we're going to put you in jail. So she came back, and Dad decided, he had to get out of that place. So that's when we moved back to California, to Los Angeles, where my dad's sisters were living. And we lived in a place in East LA called the Aliso Village, which wasn't far from where I'd been born. And that was, I think Dad was working in the shipyards again at that time, working with asbestos, which later turned out to give him lung cancer and cost him his life. But it was during that time, that was also a very dangerous neighborhood. I remember this was a time when the Pachucos or the Zoot Suiters were there. There was gang wars going on, and sometimes the sailors would come on leave and go through different neighborhoods, beating people up, beating up Mexicans and blacks. There was a lot of racial strife. And it was during this time when Faye was gone again. She ran off with a sailor and was gone for a couple of months. Dad didn't know where she was. He put an ad in the paper with a picture looking for her. Dad was taking care of all 5 children. I mean, he was leaving us again with a next door neighbor, a black couple by the name of, we called them Mammy and Pappy Yates. He would go to work and come home and take care of us. And then when he was gone, one time, Faye's father, Grandpa White, came and took the girls to live with them in Arizona. So Dad had then Bill and me and Clayton. And then one day when he was at work, Faye came and took Clayton. Dad said, stole Clayton away from him and took Clayton to live in Arizona with her parents and with the girls. My dad, by this time, was very discouraged, but he was also feeling the pull of patriotism because the war was raging, and he felt a sense of patriotism. So he took Bill and me back to live to Durango, to live with our mother, and by then her third husband, whose name was Louis Hoffman, also an alcoholic. And then I remember him taking us down to Union Station in Los Angeles, and we rode the train to Gallup, and then Mom drove down from Durango to pick us up, and then Dad went back and joined the Navy and set sail for the South Pacific during a time when the war was raging. That was another time when I felt alone and lonely. We were going back to live with Mom, and life was still very difficult. Louis worked for the fire department. He was a fireman. Mom worked in a bar. I remember looking for her and finding her in a bar, and I hated the smell of the beer and that whole atmosphere. And I remember the men at the bar teasing me. As I mentioned, it was a violent time. I remember Louis had a .45 pistol, and there was a dog that kept coming around our house, and he went out and shot it. I didn't kill it. The dog ran away, and every time the dog saw me, he ran away because I was there watching all of this. Louis had a friend who was an Indian. I called him can't remember. He dealt in herbs. I think they called him the Herb Indian, and I remember going to see him with Louis, and I remember him taking out a huge wad of dollar bills, which really impressed me. Later, he died. I think he had been killed. It's the first time I ever saw a dead person. I saw this huge man lying on a slab. Louis once when Bill and Janet and I were in the other room. Louis raped our mother. It was not long after that Mom abandoned us, left us alone. Louis was gone. Mom was gone. We were by ourselves in the house. I remember going to school, and then, we were just kids. We weren't doing laundry or anything. When we ran out of clean clothes, we wore pajama tops to school and then stopped going because the kids teased us. We went next door, and Mom had set up an account there, and we just charged food, mainly candy bars and soda pop. That's how we survived.